There's a change to your reading schedule. Next week's going to be Psalm 23. The week after that's going to be Psalm 63. So on the schedule, it was Psalm 63 this week. So just remember to go ahead and jump ahead a week. The blog is up to date. So go ahead and do Psalm 23 this coming up week, and that will be what the message is on Sunday, and do the reading that's attached to Psalm 23. This week we have the healing song and story of Abigail. The healing song is Psalm 5, and then the story attached to it is the Abigail story with David. Another female hero in the Bible, Abigail. And looking at this story, the first thing to notice is that there's intercalation, and that means, does anyone remember what that means? That means when you have, Dennis, you know this one, right? When you have the little story stuck into the big story. So there's a bigger narrative going on, and then you see this in the Bible. The writers will do this. They'll stick a small story in that kind of interrupts and then goes back to the big story. And they do this intentionally to speak a truth to the larger story. So that's the first thing to notice, because what's happening is David's running from Saul. Saul is pursuing David. And then there's this Abigail story. It's this kind of, it's intercalation. It's this different story in the middle, and then it goes back to David running from Saul. On each side of the Abigail story, David actually has Saul in his grasp. He's got him in the cave, and then he's got him asleep in the next one. So you see both sides, and then in the middle is this Abigail story. And so we want to see the value to recognizing intercalation is to recognize the truth in the small story in what it says to the bigger story. The truth that's out of the small story, apply it to the bigger story. So David is the second time, too, we would see that David has a chance to kill Saul in the cave, and he doesn't. And then the second time he gets a chance, I think he probably actually would have taken it. He was fed up. If it weren't for this Abigail story to teach him the truth that we're going to learn, David probably would have just taken it. I mean, can you imagine? God had promised him to be king. Samuel had anointed him king. David had defeated Goliath. David had gone to battle, served Saul, done all these things. Now he's, for years and years, 10 years we were talking about, he's running from Saul. And so, being pursued by evil, being surrounded by wickedness all the time wears us down, doesn't it? Satan, what he's trying to do is he's trying to basically outnumber us and make us feel like, why should I stand here and continue with all my effort to try to be righteous when the rest of the world's just wicked? And so, you can't beat them, join them. Just give in. And that this is what can happen. We can just simply get worn down by the world, by the wickedness that's in the world. And that's exactly what Satan wants us to do. He wants us to give in. But that is not our calling. We are called to be righteous. We are called to rise above the wickedness. We are called to be, I can't say it any better than this. This is Philippians 2:15.
So that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault, in a crooked and depraved generation, in which you shine like stars in the universe.
Shining stars. It's not easy being a shining star, but that is our call, to be that light shining through the darkness. So here's the story. What happens is Samuel dies, Samuel the old prophet, and so all Israel, all the important people in Israel, go to his memorial service to mourn him. And this can take a while. It could take 30 days or so. That's the time of mourning. And so Saul has to go. So Saul can't pursue David for a while. Saul has to go. He has to travel. He has to go and do this whole thing for Samuel. And of course, David can't go because he's going to run into Saul there. So David has a respite here. David has a little vacation from running from Saul. And so he gets to settle in for a bit. He's road weary, and he wants to settle in just for a while and feel what it's like to not be running all the time, to not be on the lam. And so he decides, him and his men that are with him, they decide to settle into the wilderness of Moab. And right next door is a plantation of a rich couple, okay? And we have a beautiful, intelligent Southern belle named Abigail. And that name means father's joy. Abba, and then Gail is joy, Abigail. So father's joy. Yeah, you knew that, Gail, didn't you? Yes. Of course it is. And then there's a foolish, ugly old man named Nabal. Okay, and what does his name mean? Anyone did the reading? Chris said, fool. That means fool. All right, so what we have is a perfect contrast. We have a perfect contrast in names because we have Abigail as father's joy, and then listen to this. This is Proverbs 17:21.
To have a fool for a son brings grief. There is no joy for the father of a fool.
Okay. So we have father's joy and then father's anti-joy because we have a fool. And so really this is basically your typical couple. You know, if it weren't for this phenomenon that women are attracted to men that are kind of like their father, the human race would have been gone extinct a long time ago. So what we have is basically the typical couple. And then what happens is July 4th rolls around. And actually, it wasn't July 4th, but it was sheep shearing time, and it was very similar to July 4th in that it was a festive time, and there was a lot of meat on the grill. So that's basically July 4th, right? And then it's also very hot, and there's fireworks. So that's what was happening. July 4th runs around, and David's wondering. David has been a good neighbor because what happens with Nabal is he has so much livestock that he can't possibly have enough land for them to graze there, and so he lets them out of his gates and they get to go off elsewhere, and he sends them with shepherds. And a lot of times in people in David's situation that are traveling through will take a few sheep for themselves. They won't even bother asking. You know, it's one sheep wanders off and the wolves jump on it, you know. And sometimes even the shepherds can be harmed or abused and such. But David didn't do this. He was continuing to be righteous in his men, and they didn't harm any of their neighbors' property. In fact, they actually made sure that no one else would harm them. And so David wonders if there's maybe an extra dog or two on the grill over at Nabal's celebration. You know, you hear a July 4th going on across the fence, and you wander over. Why? Of course, that's what you're supposed to do, right? So he sends some delegates over, and they ask for leftovers. They bless Nabal and tell him they've been living next door and looking after his shepherds and his livestock, and they bless him, and then they say, hey, do you have anything you'd like to give us? Well, this is the fool's response. This is 25:10 through 11.
Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I've slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where?"
So who is David? These are all insults. Who is David? Everybody knew who David was. David had already defeated Goliath. He had been Saul's general. They had already made up a song about David. Remember, Saul has killed his thousands, David his 10,000s. Nabal knew. Nabal was an Israelite. He knew exactly who David was. And so that was an insult. Who is David? And then he says, many servants are running away from their masters. And that's another dig at David, because that's talking about how David is actually supposed to be serving Saul, but he's broken away and he's run away. And so he says, another insult, David's just a runaway slave. And then he really insults God here in saying, why should I share my food? You know, that is an insult to your Creator. That is a breaking the law of being generous and neighborly. And then it's, why should I share? It's what a fool says. It's what someone says who doesn't believe God exists, that believes they can be greedy and selfish and nothing's going to happen to them, and they can just get away with it. And so that's a slap in God's face. This is Psalm 53:1.
The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, vile, and unjust. Not one of them does right.
Yeah, so this is the fool. He's showing himself to be his name. He's showing himself to be a fool by saying, why should I share anything? It's just kind of like, it's a similar response to when Cain said, after he had killed Abel, and now God's giving him the chance to fall on his knees and ask forgiveness. And so God says, hey, Cain, where's Abel? And Cain says, am I my brother's keeper? What a slap across God's face. Of course you're your brother's keeper. Of course you are. Of course there's a God watching and wants you to be loving. You know, Jesus said there's two things I want you to do. These two things are top priority. Everything follows. I want you to love the Lord and I want you to love your neighbor. After that, the law hinges on all of these things. And after that, everything is secondary. And, you know, I think a lot of us, as far as the church, I mean, a lot of us individually, this is our challenge, but as far as the big church, we've seemed to have forgotten this. We've let these other agendas come up and rise to the surface and rise above this one, loving the neighbor. We're supposed to be loving. Any other thing that takes priority over that is wrong. And we should not be doing it. We're wrong. And this is our challenge. We got to get our priorities straight. We are to love God and love our neighbor. Everything else has to follow that. And so we see that. And that's our own challenge. If we don't have any love, then what we become is we become dark stars that have such a heavy gravity that they pull their own light in and they're just greedy and they don't shine. They're nothing. You look up in the sky and you don't see them. Someone looking to the sky for hope, for a little bit of light, doesn't see you if you don't have any love. The love is our light, and that's what we are to shine. So how does David react to the fool's insult? Well, he says, swords. Swords. Men, let's go. He's a little, Nabal's gotten under his skin a little bit. He gets angry, just as you or I might if we went over to our neighbors and were insulted. Why'd you come over here? Who are you? Why should I share with you? Insulted. We get angry, right? And so we see that David is not the hero of this story. He fell for Satan's cheap trick. This is what happens to us. When someone's, we're monkey see, monkey do. Someone's a jerk to us, then our natural response is to be a bigger jerk back. Isn't that to one-up them in one-ups monkeyship. We want to be, let me be a jerk. In youth group, Connor made this up. You're the jerk of the whole game. Do you want to be the jerk of the whole game? And, we'd be playing volleyball or something. And of course, someone's going to get frustrated at some point. But then are they going to let that frustration build over? Or, even worse, one person gets frustrated and then someone reacts back to them. That's what always happens. Kaká last night got thrown out of the game because some guy pushed him and there wasn't a call, and so he came back and retaliated, and that's always the one that gets thrown out. See you later. He had scored earlier and we still tied, so that was okay, but that's what happens. And you always, that's always going to be what you regret. That those are Satan's cheap tricks, and we fell for it. You don't regret any graciousness, any love, any forgiveness, any kindness. You'll never regret that. What you will regret is when you were a jerk, right? And it doesn't matter. You can explain to you, well, they did this to me, and this is why I'm being a jerk, you see. It just doesn't matter. You're the jerk of the whole game, and everyone sees it, and you're never going to win with that. It doesn't matter if you won or lost. What's the lasting part is you're going to be regretting that you were a jerk. And that's what we do. And so we can't fall in. We cannot fall for these cheap tricks where we're insulted, and then we have to insult back. Someone we feel like they're being a jerk to us, so we have to be a double jerk back to them. It just doesn't work. It's not what we're called to be. So David immediately, while he's still hot, doesn't think about it, doesn't inquire of the Lord, which is what he is known for, which is what he does. He never goes to battle without asking the Lord first. But so while he's angry, he gathers 400 men, and then he heads directly over next door to Nabal's plantation. And he's cursing a blue streak the whole way. And then he comes around the corner, and boom, and he runs into this beautiful, intelligent Southern belle. And he's in the midst of cursing, and he runs into her, and he runs into the face of grace and beauty, and he's taken back. His countenance changes like a angry mother who's just picked up the telephone. So here's what happens. This is 1 Samuel 25:21 through 22.
It's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the desert so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him.
You see it? And then our hero, Abigail, intervenes with her wisdom. And in this, when she's saying my master, she's actually she's not talking about Nabal. She's referring to David as her master in this. Go ahead, Chris.
Please forgive your servant's offense, for the Lord will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my master, because he fights the Lord's battles. Let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live, even though someone is pursuing you to take your life. The life of my master will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has done for my master every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him leader over Israel, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed, or of having avenged himself. And when the Lord has brought my master success, remember your servant.
Here's the lesson. Here's the truth that's provided by the short story to bring to the bigger story. It's the main point of the intercalation. See, Abigail speaks to David, and she gets right to the true issue. And the true issue is that David is worn down because Saul is pursuing him relentlessly. He's worn down by the wickedness. Evil has dragged him down, and he's about to give in to it. He's so worn down that this guy next door has insulted him, and now he's ready to not inquire of the Lord and kill the guy. And not only kill him, but kill every male in his household. make the women his slaves, steal all his property, basically check off about 5 of the 10 commandments, right? Break them right off. And he's ready to do it because he's so worn down. But what she does, and here's what we need to remember, is she reminds him of God's promises. David needed to trust God. He needed to realize that God has and will protect him. He does not need to fight this battle himself. He needs to let it go, give it to the Lord, because the Lord will bring justice to the situation. She even says David fights the Lord's battles. She says that. We only fight the battles that God wants us to fight. If we go into battle without him, we are in serious trouble. If he wants us to go into a battle, he has already arranged for it, he's already arranged victory, then we need to go. But only if it's a battle he wants us to take on. So then David, here's his reaction. This is 1 Samuel 25, 32 through 33. He's not a fool.
Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands.
He's not a fool. He didn't say, "Get out of my way, woman. This is man stuff. This is a man battle." He recognized that she was a gift from God. God has sent you to save me from being reckless, stupid, the jerk of the whole game. You've saved me. We need to respond to the Abigails that God sends us. He promises when we're tempted, he's going to find some way out. And a lot of times what the way out is we see a shining star in the universe. Someone comes around, maybe a stranger, maybe someone we know, and we're reminded and we're encouraged. We see what righteousness looks like, what loving really is. We see the gift of God in that person, and it breaks away all our anger, and it sets us straight because we see that person is living on God's promises. They're trusting God. They're not fighting their own battles. They're not falling for the devil's cheap tricks. And it's so encouraging. We need to be Abigails because they're the shining stars. This is Matthew 5:9. This is what Jesus said.
Blessed are the peacemakers. They shall be recognized as God's children.
And then in Psalm 5, back to the healing song, David echoes this same lesson to us. This is Psalm 5, 4 through 8.
You are not a God who takes pleasure in evil. With you the wicked cannot dwell. The arrogant cannot stand in your presence. You hate all who do wrong. You destroy those who tell lies. Bloodthirsty and deceitful men the Lord abhors. But I, by your great mercy, will come into your house. In reverence, I will bow down toward your holy temple. Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness because of my enemies. Make straight your way before me.
The world is full of evil, and God is not pleased with it, and he's not going to just let it go. And then I love this, but I. He says, but I. And that's a perfect phrase for, I'm not going to join it. The world's full of evil. It's a river of evil flowing this way, but I am not going to be a part of it. I will come into the Lord's house. I will come into the Lord's presence, and I will be humbled. I will humble myself. I will get in touch with the Lord's great mercy to me, and I will pray. Lead me in your righteousness. Make your way straight before me. I'm not going to have an angry, knee-jerk reaction, but I'm going to trust that God would handle it. And this is what David learned, and this is the truth, and this is the lesson for us, because we're surrounded. And sometimes we feel persecuted and pursued by some person who may not even seem like an evil person to us, but they seem filled with evil at that time, or some evil intent. And we can be the same way. And so how do we handle that? Do we let them wear us down? Do we let them wear us down and then take it out on someone else? Do we knee-jerk react to the world that's always poking and prodding us and trying to drag us down to the level of anger and vengeance? Or do we shine like stars in the universe by trusting the Lord? Take refuge in the Lord and pray for God's intervention. This is what David does to complete the psalm. This is 9 through 12.
Not a word from their mouth can be trusted. Their heart is filled with destruction. Their throat is an open grave. With their tongue they speak deceit. Declare them guilty, O God. Let their intrigues be their downfall. Banish them for their many sins, for they have rebelled against you. But let all who take refuge in you be glad. Let them ever sing for joy. Spread your protection over them, that those who love your name may rejoice in you. For surely, O Lord, you bless the righteous. You surround them with your favor as with a shield.
You surround them, the people that take refuge in the Lord. You surround them with your favor as with a shield. We have a shield of grace that is protecting us. Why would we go into battle without that? Why would we come out from under that and try to fight our own battle? We have a shield of grace that God has surrounded us with. We need to trust that. And this was the lesson David learned. One of the many lessons David learns, and that's the beauty of looking at David's story, is because we get to learn along the way with him. And the rest of the story then wraps up like a fairy tale, because David gets the girl. And the old man, the cranky old guy just dies on his own. He's got a bad hangover, and then his heart turns to stone, and then he dies, and which is God taking care of it for David. And then Abigail becomes his wife. For this time of he was feeling he didn't have a wife. The wife that Saul gave him was back in Jerusalem, and he never got a wife at this point. And so this is what he needed at the time. God provided for him way better than he could have thought of it. Maybe he thought, well, maybe I've heard this Nabal's wife is pretty. Maybe I'll go kill him and all his men, and then I'll take her for myself. She'll be my, servant. No, that's not. God can write a story much better than we can he? And so he writes a beautiful love fairy tale that ends this way. God has his provision for us. We're not going to achieve it through our anger, through our fighting for ourselves, through selfishness and greed. We're going to obtain it through coming under the refuge of his shield of grace and being shining stars in the universe.